that just start recording?
Yes. Sorry.
All right. I'm Steve Swanson. I work with EPG, which is now a Terracon company. So last year we were 50 employees. This year I think we're like 6,000 employees. Not all archaeologists. I think we have maybe 50 archaeologists in our, or 60 in our staff. About a fourth of those here in Arizona. I'm going to talk today about a recent project that we conducted in Southwest Phoenix, in a community called Levine. Actually, I can get my glasses. I'll read this to you. So last year, we did phase 1 data recovery testing for a residential housing development. You can actually see that very well.
Excuse me. So here on the screen, you can see it's in black there. It's the southwest corner of the site, which is designated AZ T1291 by SM.
The project, the phase 1 testing project was conducted in consultation with the city of Phoenix, the Gila River Indian Community, Hopi Tribe, and the Arizona State Museum. AZ T1291 ASM. The site is located near the west end of South Mountain Park, just over a mile east of the boundary of the Gila River Indian Community. The site was investigated as part of the Loop 202 freeway project, but information from that investigation is not being released because of some confidentiality agreements between ADOT and the tribes. So we're working in the area immediately east of the 202 corridor where Westland had conducted some previous excavations for the freeway. Just zip through a couple of these old canal maps here. In Turney's map of prehistoric canals and communities, he didn't have anything plotted in our project area, although he has an area of dense architecture immediately to the northwest, about a mile or so away, and then some extensive structures plotted to the southwest. On this map, he's labeled in Pueblo Primero and Villa Buena.
Sorry, Steve, I need to turn this. You're not on microphone. Let's do it that way.
Thank you. This is the 1966 version of one of Midvale's maps. In this, our project area is kind of in the center of that red bubble. So there's at least he's got a canal plotted nearby, but not in our project area. Of course, the accuracy of these maps are not high and should be relied on to determine if you're going to have a canal feature in your project area. Another really good source is historic aerial photos, Fairchild's. In this case, we use the Maricopa County historical aerial photos from 1937 to 1949. And what we did is just went through and traced out dark lines that roughly follow contours that could be possible prehistoric canal features. They tend to line up with things that were mapped by Turney or Midvale, but they're, I find, to be sometimes more precise, unless of course you mapped out something that was not a canal at all. In this case, our project area is there in yellow, and so immediately on the left side of our project area is where the new 202 goes through, and you can see that in this case I've eyeballed in what looks to be some kind of possible water feature or something crossing the project area, and it turns out that that's exactly where we found a canal, which is not always the case, but it was kind of nice. So for phase 1 testing, we had over 100 trenches, which was a combination of your standard deep and narrow trenches, and then a mix of some shallow, broader trenches that were excavated down to plow zone. The trenches were regularly spaced. For some reason, it's not updated. Sorry. The trenches were regularly spaced, excavated mechanically, using most of them were oriented north, south, and east, west. Once we had enough trenches in there to identify the probable canal courses, we added some additional trenches. In this case, you can see some that are kind of cocked off at an angle on a 45 degrees to try and catch some distribution canal and a couple of laterals. And then in addition to this, and you'll see there's kind of a white area out there. That's just an area where my drone, for whatever reason, missed a photo, but it actually happens right about where we placed our stripping area. We did a larger stripping area where we thought we would, had kind of eyeballed in where the canal and the lateral should meet. So the overall results, you see here on the map, we did find a distribution canal. It's probably a branch off of what was labeled as Mid-Vales Lavine Canal. We had 2 small laterals that shot to the northwest. We found 3 thermal features. 2 of them are downslope of the canal. There's one, it's like one southeast of the canal, kind of out by itself. I'm not sure if that was prehistoric or modern feature. We also, you can see a cluster of the little green dots up there. There are features at the canal where the northern lateral extends from the branch distribution canal. And those were, that's our stripping area we were looking for, whatever features might be associated with that junction there. The red dots on this map show the locations of artifacts that we identified before we started the phase 1 trenching. And you can see that those all are pretty much northwest of the, and downslope, I should say, northwest and downslope of that canal. You'll also notice the clever ones among you that they are all kind of lined up north-south. And if I went back to that image there, we could line those up there, but they were popping out along the bones that were in between the irrigated parts of the field. So that's why they're all lined up like that. We didn't find any features suggesting permanent habitations, no pit houses, no mortuary features. We didn't find a diversity of artifacts that you might expect if there had been, say, a classic surface occupation that had been plowed away. So we didn't have things like a shell and a schist and groundstone, other things, kind of just sherds, flakes, and some informal tools. So as the phase 1 trenching was wrapping up, we recognized that there would likely be no requirement for additional data recovery because of the nature of the project. In consultation with Lori Montero, we indicated that we would like to milk a little more data from the phase 1 by doing this stripping area here, right where we thought we ought to find the connection between the lateral and the distribution. So to do that, we just put flags on our backdoor piles where these the canals and the canal alignments were, and literally just eyeballed it in and have the backhoe guy go over and start scraping away. They did the stripping in like 10, 15 centimeter increments, and we had archaeologists monitor it. We then cleaned off that exposed plan view with flathead shovels, and then a leaf blower to kind of clean up what we were seeing. After that, I went in and poked around, made sure stains were features, and then we used a hand pump water sprayer to outline what we were seeing. And then sent the drone up and took a photo. So in this image, north is at the top. So the distribution is running, yes, northeast to southwest, and the lateral shooting off towards the northwest. So the features that we found are all upslope of the canal. So here I've just rotated it around now. Remembering north is kind of off towards the bottom line. Here we can see the base of Plowsome. And if you, I think it shows up pretty well, you can see a series of kind of diagonal lines running from the top left towards the bottom right. And those are the plow stars that we identified as the base of Plowsome. At the right, arrows show the direction of flow, presumed flow. Just upslope of the canal lateral intersection, we found 2 pits, one with evidence for burning, the other one not really. All the features here, I should note, are truncated. Plowsome was ranged from like 12 to 18 inches thick, so I'm not sure how much these features could be missing. It's hitting really the bases of these. Upslope of those two features, you see it labeled there, what we think is an adobe puddling pit. There's a narrow channel, I guess that would be east of the puddling pit. It appears to be directing water into a small reservoir with a lot of silts and clays, but also a lot of coarse sands and pebbles. I suspect that the coarse grained sediments was pulled from the canal nearby. I just pulled handfuls of the sediments at the base of the canal, compared it to a handful of that, and it looked pretty identical. So it's probably being pulled out of the canal and used in that feature. Just upslope of that were two unburned pits. Those are the two feature labeled pit immediately left, in this case, of the adobe puddling pit. We had fragments of a single vessel in the two pits, like a helix shoulder planeware, and some pretty good sized chunks of the vessel in each of the two pits. So I suspect they're contemporaneous, although of course we can't rule out that a plow, sometime in the 1900s cut through that feature and dragged that up. I was at least suspect that they could be contemporaneous. In addition to ceramics, we identified several informal lithic tools in what we're calling a canal side work area. Some of these were in the unburned pits, others were scattered around the work area upslope of that canal, distribution canal and lateral. The tools consisted of 6 scrapers made from primary or secondary flakes, 2 spoke shaves, digging tool or stone hoe, 1 core chopper tool, and 1 pulper or crusher tool. Based on the dorsal cortex, it looks like all the tools were derived from rounded river cobbles, probably coming from nearby Salt River. So we suspect that the group that was working in this area may have cached some of the tool stone and the tools. Several of the flake tools look like they came from the same core. And there were also, in addition to a couple of cores there, of really similar material. Some of it was distinct with kind of like green hinge and little coppery colored veins, where like you could really identify multiple pieces coming from one material. The artifact assemblage in the canal side work area may contrast with the artifacts identified downslope in the what we presume are field areas between those laterals. This graph is showing the artifact assemblage from the work area and the field areas. In this case, there's quite a bit of debitage and ceramic material, but I should note that a lot of the flakes and surs were broken because of plowing, so their number might be a little overrepresented. Also, when we were shooting these artifacts in, we were not stopping to identify loose wear and other evidence like the retouch along the flake. So some of those debitage pieces may actually have been used as informal tools. I assume they were doing something with those in the in a front field. Just to get an idea if this is typical of an irrigated tool assemblage, we compared it with another assemblage we documented at a site nearby, several miles to the east. The site was named Las Canopus by early archaeologists. In that area, we identified 2 canal branches, probably distribution canals, that were immediately northeast of Las Canopus. This assemblage is also from surface context, some of them plowed. However, the artifacts that we did find was really interesting, clustered very tightly to the canal alignments. So that is, we went in and shot in the artifacts, and then once we excavated, lo and behold, the strings of artifacts tended to be where we found a canal, 18 inches underground. So despite the plowing, it seemed like you can get, in some cases at least, or these 2 cases, there's some information still available in those surface assemblages, despite getting moved around. The assemblages here slightly different from what we saw at AZT 1291. In this case, you can see there's a lot less debitage, and a much higher percentage of informal tools. Although the high proportion of informal tools is maybe more similar to what we had at that work area rather than the fields. Many of these lithic tools were primary and secondary flake scrapers. digging tools and heavy crushing and pulping tools. So in terms of trying to understand what people were doing with these informal tools, I suspect that some of that had to do with the canal maintenance, also with planting, field maintenance, harvesting. The spoke shaves and some of the scrapers look like, in my mind, I guess, they would be useful tools for preparing other tools. So if they're working on planting sticks or digging sticks or other things out of wood, that those might have been used to prepare other field tools that were perishable and of course not now visible in the archaeological record. So since my talk is really short, I decided it would also be helpful if we compared these tool assemblages from an irrigation farming context with a tool assemblage from a very drastically different dry farming context. So this is a dry farming site at South Mountain. It's an artifact assemblage that we documented in 2007 in a Heritage Fund grant that was a collaboration between the City of Phoenix and Arizona State University. This site is at it's called the Northeast Terrace site, or so we call it, because it was a terrace site at the northeast corner of South Mountain. So it's just kitty corner from the Fry's Electronics Store, if you all know where that is, down on Baseline. And then there's the Point Hilton immediately to the east. There's a parking lot you can kind of see in the background of the photo on the left. So it's a trailhead. It's got a lot of use. The trails actually follow the terraces in some cases. So this site, we did survey, surface collection, and excavation, including specialized samples, soil samples, and phytoplankton pollen in the terraces themselves to see what was being grown there. There's about 6 kilometers of linear terraces and 50 or more smaller curved terraces. The pollen and phytolith data indicate they were growing agave there, but also probably maize. We did have maize root phytoliths, although we're not anywhere near a prehistoric canal. There is a historic canal you can see on the topo, but that was not there prehistorically. The nearest prehistoric canal is about a mile to the north. So this tool assemblage, first I should orient you a little on the site on the right. You can see the aerial photo. Sorry, I'm supposed to stay here so they can see. On the right is the aerial photo. We had things color coded. I didn't read you them out. We had things color coded so we could group the terraces into groups for the research we were doing out there. Those orange, blue, green, those are long linear terraces. The terraces actually continue under that parking lot. It looks like they just put the asphalt right over the top of them because there are east-west cracks in the asphalt that line up with those terraces. They're pretty long, continuous. We had a lot of Gila butte right on buff out there. So, and those were scattered across terraces, not just in one area. So I think it started very early, but we have later pottery there as well. It's probably used for quite a long time. They could have grown quite a bit of agave on there. Immediately east were some 50, 60 meter diameter roasting pits that were documented by Midvale, and then there's a nearby site of Los Hornos where they were also doing a lot of agave processing. So I speculate that perhaps this was a source for some of that agave. So looking at the tool assemblage, on the left, you can see it's dominated by ceramics. Most of the ceramics out there were plainware, although we did have some diagnostics. Informal tools were also abundant, as at the other 2 locations. The real difference, I think, here is the high proportion of ceramics. And so I suspect that those ceramics are being used to hand water the plants on these dry terraces, at the planting time or transplanting time, or during dry intervals when there wasn't rain, because this is completely a rain-fed system. The informal tools here are quite different from those that we saw in the irrigated context. And so, but to some extent, that's probably because of the agave. They seem to be a fairly specialized, informal, if you will, tool set with agave knives, a lot of monos and hammerstones and pulper pressers that were probably used to separate the agave fibers from the leaves. tools for removing the leaves from the plants, and then digging tool as well. So this is on this graph, the informal tools and groundstone are now pushed over this. We're looking at these kind of separately from the ceramics and the debitage. You see that hammerstone, the groundstone, all of that groundstone was usually either an informal mono or a pestle, or in a few cases, looked like two-headed monos that had been expended or had broken, were being used just as kind of hammerstones, so just pounding things with that. And then the agave knife or primary flake tools out there were fairly distinct. Those are all made from cobbles from the Salt River. Really large flakes were just whacked off, and then a single flake taken off the back to provide probably an edge for stripping marginal spines from the agave. So to wrap up, the combination of deep trenching and shallow scraping can help us identify some of these canal side areas. Small work areas associated with canal operation and maintenance can be identified during phase one without having to go to phase two. If you can get to phase two, that's even better. Deep trenches helped us trace out the canal locations, the branches, the laterals, and then of course the scraping let us find out what was associated with those locations. If we can document more of these, it'll provide us insights into irrigation, cultivation, and maybe how labor was organized along these canals. We've started to identify agricultural tool assemblages for irrigated versus dry farming contexts. If anybody has a nice little data set that they want to send me, I'd be happy to incorporate that into this and hopefully work it up into something of publication. The two assemblages from that agave dry farming field versus the irrigated field really look distinct. And so I think if somebody handed me an assemblage and said, this is from a farming context, how we could make a good argument whether it came from a dry farming context versus an irrigated farming context, at least with a small sample. And I would say we had about 350 artifacts, not including ceramics, at the dry farming site, and then probably talking about 100 artifacts stuff in these two irrigated assemblages. So those are pretty small sample sizes, so they're just sheer speculation. I think that there are some interesting research questions that could be addressed by these little canal side work areas. So for example, we didn't find a ramada or a field house or anything associated with this work area. Does that mean that there was a habitation nearby and it was just not enough? It wasn't worth the effort to try and build some substantial feature there. Who is at this location? Is it a family or the individual assigned to the nearby plot between the laterals? Or is there, a zonjero or ditch runner that's opening multiple laterals up and down the canals? And those are the kinds of things I think we might be able to start answering some of those questions if we investigate some more of these places. And of course, what else is going on at the canal side work area? Why is there an W polling pit there? Is that to make little plugs for plugging the lateral? It seems like a lot of effort. Or are they passing the time while they're also monitoring the field, and maybe they're making the adobe bricks to go back to their village? I have no idea. Hopefully, though, this kind of studies like this, finding more of these locations, understanding how they're distributed up and down the canals, where they are in relation to villages, will help us learn more about the organization of labor. That's all I have. I don't know if we have time for questions. I feel like Dan's kind of been behind me for a while, so.
I did not today.
All right. So feel free to email me any questions or comments or ideas you have. My easy email is archaeologist@asu.edu. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And I absolutely love this idea that there is a ancient equivalent to what we now call a zanjero or mayordomo in New Mexico. And of course, with any level of organization, there's going to be some sort of office like that. So what a great project, Steve. So next up, we will have Chris Rail. Chris, I did find a mouse for you, so I'm going to plug that in here so that I'm controlling. Let's hope it works. Everyone, Chris Rail. Doesn't work on the surface, so you gotta have to use that. So, highlight right there.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris Rail. I'm with Northwind Resource Consulting. And I'm just going to jump right in here because I've got a lot to cover in 20 minutes. So in 2020, Northwind conducted mitigation efforts on the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community in support of sewer and water installations for the proposed River People Healthcare Center, a new medical facility located at the corner of McDowell Road and State Route 87, which is this building right over here. Our project area came up McKellips up to Dobson and down McDowell. Our testing and data recovery conducted along McKellips and Dobson roads resulted in 2 subsurface exposures of the Pima Lateral, an historic canal identified from archival maps and aerial photographs that served as the principal irrigation work for the Northside community prior to the creation of the Salt River Indian Reservation in 1879. So we had an exposure here at Dobson and an exposure here on McKellips. These efforts provided for a geomorphological analysis of the canal and the surrounding Lehigh Terrace landform, as well as an examination of archival documents and maps and preparing an historic context to better understand the canal's significance. This context not only informed on the developmental history of the Pima Lateral and the Northside irrigation system as a whole, but also on the social, political, economic, and environmental factors that affected the trajectory of federal modernization efforts during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The story of the Salt River community begins with the creation of the Gila River Indian Reservation in 1859. Within a few years of its establishment, intensification of non-native settlement upstream from the reservation in the vicinity of the Florence town site resulted in the construction of irrigation works on the river, diverting waters that would normally reach the Gila River community. Due to this reception of water rights and lacking an ability to successfully irrigate their own crops, hundreds of Oatham and Peepash farmers began migrating to the Salt River Valley to find suitable public domain lands for agricultural production. Now in 1872, the Weekly Arizona Miner reported a ditch being constructed by native farmers in the vicinity of present-day Dobson Road and State Route 87 south of Thomas Road. The native-built system used 2 brush and rock dams to divert water from the Salt River. The upper dam, located approximately 7 miles below the Arizona Canal head, which is roughly here, stretched across the entire river, diverting water into the North Channel, labeled North Fork right here. The lower dam, located approximately 1.5 miles to the south, diverted water from the North Fork here into the main irrigation canal that was located in this area. Now, a commonly held view about this area is that recently arrived European immigrants welcomed migration from the Gila River community, believing that a Pima settlement in the East Valley would provide a buffer against Apache raiding. However, the truth is that most the white settlers here resented their presence, and there was clashes over land and water rights, and forcing the federal government to intervene and establish the Salt River Indian Reservation in 1879. Now, while creation of the reservation assured access to the Salt River water for irrigation, conflicts over water rights continued to intensify as non-native canal projects began diverting the river's water to fields downstream of the reservation, the most significant of which was the Arizona Canal up here. Construction of the Arizona Canal had a lasting impact on the Northside community. Within the first month of construction in 1883, work on the canal was halted by Indian Services, citing a lack of right-of-way. The federal government approved a right-of-way in 1884, provided that the canal company agreed to provide water access to the Salt River community and not interfere with the reservation's irrigation system. Now, despite these stipulations, community access to water from the Arizona Canal would not occur until 1894, when they finally did get a lateral distribution canal put in. The 1894 construction of the Salt River Community's distribution canal was a result of a failed scheme undertaken by the Arizona Canal Company to provide water to ditches on the south side of the river. Although another canal company was in the best position to provide water to these south side ditches, so basically down here, the Arizona Canal Company took the initiative and constructed a cross-cut canal from the Arizona right here to discharge water back into the Salt River. The idea being is there was a 4-mile stretch roughly here from their head, and they would just bring the water over, dump it through the crosscut, and dump it back into the Salt River. And then the ditches down here could pick up the water. They called this the Evergreen Crosscut, and it discharged sediments from the channel, and it quickly formed a bar behind the community's upper dam right here. And it impeded the flow down the north channel here and into the main irrigation canal. So obligated under the 1884 agreement, the Arizona Canal Company had to remove the bar. And since they were still under obligation to provide water access to the community, they just opted to go ahead and put this lateral in right here. That was probably my longest exposition, and we'll just jump right in. Let's talk about the Pima Lateral. The name is derived from Midvale. He referred to the canal as the historic Pima Lateral at a time when it no longer served its original purpose as a main irrigation canal. We'll see what I mean in a minute. A 1937 Indian Services map also refers to the canal as the Old Salt River Ditch. Both names recognize the historic legacy of this property, but it is a former that has been commonly used by previous cultural resource studies. In this slide is the 1888 survey platland overlay of terrace boundaries and highlighting the first depiction of the Pima Lateral constructed in 1872. In addition to the Pima Lateral, the plat provides the earliest depiction of historic development on this portion of the Lehigh Terrace and provides our baseline for comparison with later plats, maps, and aerial imagery. Labeled irrigation ditch, the channel extends along a southwest heading through the township from the northeast quarter of section 4 up here down to the southwest quarter of section 7. The plat roughly demarcates the boundary between the Mesa and Lehigh Terraces right here with level Mesa called out. And it's depicting about 1,230 acres of farmland extending from the edge of the Mesa Terrace down to the river, of which some 440 acres were below the terrace on the Salt River floodplains down in here. Although not depicted, the Pima Lateral would have directed water into smaller unmapped distribution canals and field laterals along its length to irrigate the furthest upslope and downslope reaches of the depicted farmland. On this plat, you have 11 house clusters composed of 73 individual structures labeled huts, as well as an old trading store up here. So this is kind of where the modern Salt River community is. The arrangement of these clusters appears to be reflective of an agricultural landscape with 46 of the 59 structures plotted below the canal within the floodplain. A large cluster along the terrace floodplain transition right here corresponds with an area known as the pre-allotment first village. Settlement on the Lehigh Terrace includes 2 clusters or 8 structures total and 4 structures of the first village here south of the canal, while another cluster of 4 structures occurs in this area over here called Level Bottom, and then 3 clusters, including the trading store, depicted up here on the Mesa Terrace. Equivalent plats are unavailable for the adjacent townships for 1888, so we're kind of uncertain of where the canal head was, though it was assumed it'll be at the lower diversion dam approximately 0.6 miles to the northeast of this map's boundary. Historic 1930 aerial imagery reveals 2 visible channels extending 0.6 miles from the river to the location described for the lower dam. The less visible and most likely older upper channel right here aligns with the 1888 plat alignment along a similar southwest heading, suggesting this is a portion of the canal began in 1872. By comparison, this lower channel is very well defined, likely younger in age, and extends along a shallower southwest heading that aligns with the 1903 depiction of the canal, which is actually this right here. And as you can see, it just lines right into there. Large flood events have commonly occurred on the Salt River for thousands of years. However, the greatest flood on record began on February 18th in 1891, when over the course of several days, the Salt River reached a peak flow of some 300,000 cubic feet per second as measured at Granite Reef Dam. It swelled to some 3 miles near Phoenix. The flood damaged all the railroad bridges in the valley, cut telegraph connections for 9 days, destroyed adobe structures, and displaced hundreds of families and resulted in 5 deaths. Now, it is assumed that the 1891 flood washed away the diversion dam and significant portions of the irrigation canal, including the head, and destroyed all of the homes that were depicted in the flood zone. So you can see this area here. Now, before I move on to the next series of slides, I wanted to show this. This is an archival map produced for the Arizona Water Company in 1900. This provides one of the first depictions of the main distribution canal constructed from the Arizona Canal. The map is generalized in its detail and scale. However, if accurate, it would indicate that the main distribution canal did not fully extend to the Lehigh Terrace and make the connection with the Pima Lateral, suggesting that, that the Pima Lateral likely continued to function as an independent canal as late as 1900. This next slide is based on the 1903 USGS map with overlays of the terrace boundaries and the 1888 Pima Lateral alignment. This map provides the first depiction of the post-1891 flood landscape along this portion of the Lehigh Terrace and demonstrates the emerging development of the Upper Mesa Terrace, as well as changing approaches to irrigation agriculture prior to the implementation of the Salt River project in 1906. Now, post-flood settlement at this time appears focused up here on the Mesa Terrace, with less than 10 individual structures shown on the entirety of the Lehigh Terrace. Now, although this migration may have been the direct result of the 1891 flood, it also coincides with post-1894 expansion of irrigable land on the upper terraces. So once that lateral distribution canal came in, boom, land rush to the upper terraces. The Pima Lateral is shown in the same location as in 1888, but exhibits a much straighter alignment. So this would be this blue alignment here. The dark blue is the original 1888. By this time, the channel no longer appears to be an independent canal, as I said, but now is the lowest lateral distribution canal within a greatly expanded upslope irrigation system. Distribution canals depicted along the northwest boundary up here are characterized by straight alignments and directional orientations that appear reflective of claimed property boundaries. Conversely, those down here on the Lehigh Terrace and the floodplain remain bound to the earlier configurations of southwest trending channels. Canals depicted here in the southwest area correspond with the furthest western extent of some 400 acres of farmland depicted on the 1888 plat. So you see the green outline here, that's what was depicted as farmland in 1888. And it suggests that these are probably rehabilitated channels that went unmapped in 1888. Interestingly, geomorphological analysis provided by Bruce Phillips here of these two canal exposures revealed that the channel here at Dobson Road should be right here, is roughly twice the size of the channel documented along McKellips down here. And the larger canal had indications of greater velocity and discharge along this point. And although it is common for canals to typically narrow the farther they extend from their source, this circumstance suggests that this primary distribution through the Pima Lateral was directed along this western fork out here for this 400-acre area out here. As you can see, there wasn't a whole lot going on down here on the lower end. The irregular nature of the canals within the central area here suggests post-flood rehabilitation and new construction. The area corresponds with the furthest extent of farmland shown to the north of the Pima Lateral on the 1888 plat. The segment of the lateral in the central area here parallels the Pima Lateral to the south there, but then it takes this 90-degree turn up to the Mesa Terrace to connect with upslope water delivery. It appears this lateral represents a previously unmapped channel, and I'm thinking it probably connected with the Pima Lateral here at this wide bend, comes up and pitching your canal out this way, and of course paralleling there. After the flood, and you're getting this upland slope distribution, it starts coming down this way. As demonstrated along the width, and the other thing is here at the wide bend, the canal has been shifted about 600 feet to the south along a half-mile section between Longmore and Alma School roads. And so the new configuration eliminated the bend, which actually provided the reach for this area out here. Another distribution canal here extends down to the Pima Lateral. In the northeast area, a short lateral extends east-west just north of McDowell Road with two secondary laterals extending south. This area corresponds, of course, with the furthest northeast extent of farmland shown in 1888, consisting of some 30 acres north of the canal. This acreage only extended about 500 feet north of the canal, was likely irrigated by field laterals connected directly to the channel. The upslope lateral appears to conform to the Mesa-Lehigh Terrace transition right here. And its presence suggests not only an intent to recover the previous farmland, but also develop the remaining acreage between the Mesa Terrace and this reconfigured Pima Lateral. A short distribution channel located on the floodplain down here corresponds with approximately 30 acres of farmland depicted in 1888. Similar to the central area, construction of this canal in the floodplain seems to have been prompted by post-flood straightening of the Pima Lateral along this bend, which shifted the channel about 900 feet to the north, eliminating the reach of what that bend was able to provide these guys. So this next slide demonstrates how the lower extent of the 1888 alignment, including the entirety of the 1903 alignment, overlaps or closely aligns with the channel that's visible in the 1930 imagery. Beyond the straightening of the channel up here, variations of the two alignments appear negligible, indicating that most of this was pretty much essentially remained unchanged between 1888 and 1903. Closer view clarifies the changes that occurred to the Pima Lateral at this time. As demonstrated, the northeastern extent of the 1903 alignment intersects with the main distribution canal at the same point that it intersects with the lower channel to the Salt River, so right here. As previously noted, construction of this lower channel was likely due to the destruction of the original headworks during the 1891 flood and would have served as a source of Salt River water until connection with the main distribution canal here. This figure also demonstrates that the distribution canal depicted on the floodplain in 1903 down here overlaps a visible but unused channel that appears to connect with the lower channel up here. The presence of this floodplain channel suggests that the diversion dam and lower head canal likely remained in use after 1894. However, flooding in the spring and fall of 1905, which measured a 75-year flood, likely resulted in further destruction along this portion of the floodplain. This canal does not appear on later plats or maps, and indicating that further agricultural efforts on the floodplain likely ceased following this event. Comparison with archival Indian Service allotment maps shows that the floodplain was not considered for allotments in 1914. The presence of the 1888 irrigation canal, repurposed as a lateral distribution canal in 1903, is indicative of post-flood reinvestment of the Lehigh Terrace. However, as demonstrated, expansion of the less flood-prone upper terraces for agricultural production appears to have taken precedence and likely contributed to slower recovery down here on the Lehigh. Of the estimated 1,230 acres of farmland depicted in 1888, only 140 appear to be cleared for cultivation in 1930, most of which occurs above the Pima Lateral, as the active farming on the floodplain likely ceased in 1905. This slide provides a portion of the 1905 Indian Services map that reveals the upper extent of the irrigation system that I just showed you on the 1903 map. This map is particularly revealing as it is indicative of expanding settlement and farming just below the Arizona Canal up here. Although the canal alignments are generalized again in their detail and scale, the map conveys a native plan system with 4 principal distribution canals, all anchored on the main distribution canal here, which was essentially serving as a proxy for the Salt River. This map makes no distinction between the main distribution canal and the Pima Lateral, so it just comes all the way down like this, extending directly to south from the Mesa Terrace. I also have noticed the distribution canal extending directly south from the Mesa Terrace right here, confirming water delivery to this portion of the Lehigh Terrace via centrally located upslope distribution. In 1905, Indian Services recognized that community farmers were attempting to cultivate too large an area for the available water supply, some 3,000 acres. As such, the agency recommended that the reservation be included in the Salt River project. Community water rights were determined by the Kent Decree, a 1910 court ruling that classified irrigable acreage by a ranking system. Receiving first rights to project water were Class A lands, which were those worked under previous water rights agreements and that had been continuously cultivated and remained active at the time of the decree. Class A lands benefited the most as they were guaranteed a certain quantity of water regardless of the amount in the Salt River. Rights were then extended to Class B lands, that's the guys here in yellow, consisting of those under cultivation before 1903 but not thereafter. And then Class C lands were those that had never been cultivated before, but entitled to water left over after the Class A-B distribution. The decree determined 2,333 acres to be Class A and 2,107 acres to be Class B. This slide is a portion of the 1914 Indian Services map depicting Class A and B lands with the overlay of the 1905 irrigation system. Note up here that the northernmost distribution canal extending through Class C land, this channel is not present here in the 1910 plat. This plat shows the full extent of the north side distribution system at the time of the Salt River project and just prior to the allotment period. Like the previous map, the 1910 plat depicts an irrigation system anchored on the main distribution canal. However, the northernmost canal is no longer present. The plat depicts 4 primary distribution canals, including the Pima lateral down here, and a number of secondary laterals. Similar to early depictions, the secondary network primarily extends along cardinal directions, likely reflective of those claimed pre-allotment property boundaries, while the primary alignments remain fixed to their primary configurations. The absence of the northernmost lateral is particularly noteworthy when examined within the context of Indian Services policy at this time. In a 1901 letter, the agency discusses community land inheritance practices and how, quote, some community leaders claim large tracts of land near the main ditch for themselves and their descendants, prompting younger men of lesser ancestry to seek land for cultivation farther afield from the ditch, making it necessary to make long ditches to carry water to their land, sometimes running through 3 or 4 miles of uncultivated land, end quote. The concerns expressed in this letter appear to have reached a resolution as detailed in a 1905 letter that provides a justification for the forced removal of a man and his family from lands claimed that they had been cultivating for years. Described as being located northwest of the village, roughly in this area, northwest, so up here, and some 4 miles from the main canal, the agency justified the family's removal, claiming that their ditch absorbed more water than was needed to irrigate the cultivated acreage. Now, this slide provides a composite of the 1910 survey plats for Township 1, ranges 4 and 5. The western area composed of sections 1 and 12 were added to the community by executive order in 1910. As depicted, the southwest termini of the 2 distribution channels, including the Pima lateral, and just short of the township boundary here, right? But over here on the other side, we've got the corresponding connections that went into section 12. Overlay of the 1903 laterals here indicates that the upper section 12 likely connected with the upper canal here along this length. Some 830 acres of Lehigh Terrace went under cultivation in 1910, of which 415 were farmed on the lower southwestern portion of the terrace. Now, this area overlaps with the community boundary and is some 10 feet lower in elevation than the upper reaches. The lowest extent lies in an area between present-day Pima Road and 92nd Street, and depicted as level bottom in 1888. This non-agricultural area corresponds with the extent of irrigated farmland in 1910 and 1914, and was likely a direct discharge point for irrigation wastewater from the Mesa Terrace. Ethnographic data indicates that the area along 92nd Street near present-day Casino, Arizona, was a small swamp, roughly here. That was eventually enclosed to collect water for other purposes. This reservoir is depicted on the 1952 Tempe topo and is visible in historic aerials post-dating 1949. The comparison of historic aerials provided here highlights the low-lying nature of this area once it was put under commercial agricultural production after 1949. Note the playa-like outlines of former ponds and current areas of standing water that starkly contrast with the other parts of the surrounding cultivated landscape. Elevation modeling suggests that floods with enough volume to reach 1,200 feet in elevation would completely inundate this portion of the Lehigh Terrace. Thus, this area would have most certainly been affected by the 1905 flood and possibly moderate floods in 1916 and 1920. Of the approximate 400 acres under cultivation in 1914, only some 140 appear to be cleared in 1930. The remaining acreage, identified by field outlines and inactive laterals, is covered in vegetation, indicating inactivity for some 65% of the previously irrigated farmlands. Although flooding likely accounted for many of the challenges faced by the farmers in the Lehigh Terrace, this was also a period of successful and prolonged droughts, coupled with uncertain water delivery. And the individual fortunes of community farmers continue not only to be affected by the vagaries of climate and access to water, but also the effects of community reorganization and broadening economic opportunities. As reclamation was determining community water distribution, Indian Services began the allotment process, resulting in 744 individual allotments totaling more than 7,000 acres. This slide is a portion of the 1914 Indian Services map depicting allotments and cultivated lands with an overlay of the Kent Decree lands and the irrigation system depicted in 1910. Now, from the start of the process, it was recognized that the Kent Decree award would not be sufficient to service all of the allottees. Water delivery as specified under the decree would be the equivalent of 5.4 acre-feet of water per acre. However, in 1922, Indian Services reported an average water use of 3.7 acre-feet per acre. This estimate was further reduced to some 2.5 when water losses due to seepage and evaporation were accounted for. Throughout this period, efforts to obtain reliable and consistent water delivery for the Salt River project remained a challenge. It was further compounded when in 1917, Reclamation transferred control of the project to the Salt River Valley Water Users Association, a private corporation of non-native landowners, and the current SIP. All right, where was I? Solutions offered by Indian Services at this time consisted of adding, I told you that. All right, yeah. Groundwater, so Indian Services wanted to add groundwater, reconfigure the system along section lines and added concrete lining to the principal distribution canals. And so let's just wrap this up. This map also derived from the 1922 Indian Services report of proposed irrigation improvements, which were completed in 1924. Overlays of the 1910 canal alignments, as well as the Kent Decree and cultivated acreage from 1914 are provided for comparison. The map demonstrates an irrigation system based on first rights, characterized by a series of directional oriented laterals, with those located west of the main distribution canal remain serviced by the principal canals depicted in 1910, so over here. At this time, the northernmost canal, the red one here, was abandoned, and Canal B up here was its substitute. On the Lehigh Terrace, several segments of the 1910 channel have been abandoned and reconfigured along the eastern end, effectively disconnecting the channel from the main distribution canal. No significant changes occurred with the Pima lateral. However, the agency deemed it impractical to concrete line the channel below section 33. So from about here to here, they decided that it just wasn't worth lining the canal with only 170 acres under cultivation. Although Indian Services reported 830 acres under cultivation at the time of the Kent Decree, final allotment boundaries in 1914 further restricted the irrigable acreage, resulting in reduction of the farmed acreage. As such, periods of flood and drought that would have affected the entire community quickly reduced the number of individuals able or willing to risk farming on the Lehigh Terrace. Certainly, the agency's 1922 recommendation to not line the Pima lateral was indicative of its reluctance to invest further resources in the area at this time. Periods of drought were endemic throughout the 1920s and 30s. As you can see here, the Pima lateral stretching here off about a mile into the distance. I just want to show you these slides here real quick to show that throughout the 20s, you've got these drought conditions. And even though over here, this looks like this is farmland, that's under production, you get a closer look and you can see that a lot of these areas, are covered in thick grasses and field laterals are choked with vegetation. And then along the length of the Pima lateral in these oblique photographs, you can see where there are road crossings here and here. So essentially what happened is, although it wasn't eliminated as a water delivery source, Indian Services essentially bypassed the upper portion of the Pima lateral and started conveying water through that central area along other ditches, which kind of effectively ended its service life as a contiguous singular distribution canal. And it would remain that way until its end in 1941. I'll just go ahead and skip over this and we'll get right to the end. In the 1930s, this is the 1930 and 37 aerials. And as you can see that there isn't a whole lot of change. It suggests a lot of inactivity on the Lehigh Terrace at this time. However, this inactivity was about to come to an end. In 1935, the federal government, on behalf of the Salt River community, entered into an agreement with the Salt River Valley Water Users Association to develop water storage on the Verde River. In doing so, they've secured 60,000 acre-feet annually of water for the community. In 1938, with the construction of Bartlett Dam nearing completion, Indian Services began implementation of the Salt River irrigation system, an entirely new irrigation network designed to serve the emerging agribusiness that resulted from allotment leasing, and which mostly remains in use to this day. Central component of the system was a new head and a main distribution canal constructed further to the east on the Arizona Canal over here at the Evergreen Wasteway. From the new heading, it was directed into a new main distribution canal paralleling the Arizona Canal, and then water was delivered through these north-south laterals across the community. To make the best use of the anticipated water supply, Indian Services implemented a policy called subjugation, contending that the entire 10,000-acre project area would need to be leveled. In 1941, the agency implemented the policy during the completion of the laterals extending to the Lehigh Terrace, filling in and burying the Pima lateral. So in ending, I just want to say that the Pima lateral, without it, the Salt River community would not be what it is today. It served as the primary irrigation canal for nearly 2 decades between 1872 and 1894. The Pima lateral provided the waters that O'odham farmers used to successfully raise crops and build a community. Although the north side irrigation system developed well beyond the original purpose and need of the original canal, the Pima lateral remained essential to farming the Lehigh Terrace, delivering waters to those who chose to remain despite the lack of first rights, as well as the continual threats presented by reoccurring periods of flood and drought. Thank you, I appreciate it, and sorry I ran over on time.
Thank you very much, Chris. Just turn off that highlighter. You guys need to see that. Okay, next up, Raylan Williams is going to talk to us about where did the water go. And after Raylan's done, we're going to have a break here. And then we're going to be setting up for our discussion after that. So everybody hang tight a little bit longer. Raylan?
Right. Good afternoon, everybody. It's Friday. It's the weekend. I'm just pumping myself out. So. My name is Raylan Williams. I'm Akinmeawatam from the Hill River Indian community. I'm also the cultural resource specialist for the Tribal Historic Preservation Office. I'm here to share how the Hill River Indian community, through tribal resolution, created the Pima Maricopa Irrigation Project that would deliver settlement waters to agricultural lands and riparian areas to the Hill River Indian community. For decades, the Hoogum have always known how to channel the free-flowing water of the Salt and Gila Rivers. The Hoogum last memory were the last day the Salt and Gila Rivers ran dry. Generations later, the Akinmeawatam would celebrate 16 years of the historic water settlement of 2004. It was a great start to this conference to visit the Park of Four Waters, taking that moment to experience these ancient canals and to spend a day talking about various research findings of the Hoogum canals in the Salt and Gila Rivers. The research and documentation of these Hoogum canals throughout the valley is proof that a whole civilization had the intelligence, the tools, and the workforce to maintain thousands of miles of irrigation systems. Many of you may have seen these photographs. The photo on the left was taken in 1904 in the village of Sacaton. The photo on the right was taken in 1901 in the village of Blackwater in the eastern part of the Gila River Indian community, which Miss Angela is from. The Gila River was free-flowing that meandered throughout the community, feeding into canals, creating riparian areas, and attracting wildlife. Here is the map of the prehistoric Hoogum canal systems in the Middle Gila Valley that was generated by the community's Cultural Resources Management Program. The Hoogum and the O'odham today continue to practice agriculture that was fed by these canals. From oral tradition, the elders would know when a canal was made or how long the field was abandoned. Though some canals may have been forgotten and fields abandoned, this is the evidence that our people were resourceful and productive and hardworking people. We know through Arizona history, the first written encounters with the Hohokam described the Gila River Valley of green, lush fields, abundance of food and crops, and riverbeds lined with cottonwood, mesquite. As more settlers entered the valley, the Hohokam were generous with sharing food, shelter, and security. One day I started to read old historic newspapers and what they wrote about Native Americans. I found the Library of Congress chronicling historic American newspapers. There was a popular news article in 1900 that was printed by the Chicago Daily Tribune that read, "Indians starving to death." I happened to find that article plus many other articles with the same title. The Years of Famine, as it was called, was from 1880 through 1920. The Chicago Daily Tribune printed this article you see in August 1st, 1874, that talked about various Indian tribes. So they talked about the Papagos, the Pimas and Maricopas, the Apaches. The Coconino Sun in Flagstaff, printed October 20th, 1900. Indian in dire want talks about the famine. This article, printed by Vernon County Censor on November 22nd, 1900, Indians in dire distress, even with this sketch titled "A Starving Pima Indian." When the O'odham started pressing the federal government, demanding the return of the water would start the 80-year fight for water rights. I came across news articles that spoke of the O'odham abundant wheat harvest brought into Phoenix for trade, and how the valley needed to tend to abandoned fields. The Rock Island Argus got ahead of myself. The Rock Island Argus, printed in February 21st, 1913, Friends of Reclamation Service say F.H. Newell, attacked by House Committee, is best friend of Pima Indian tribe. And you can see there's some photographs that was printed in this newspaper, and I believe one of them is actually in the SRP archive collection. So I found that. Interesting. Douglas Daily Dispatch, printed May 23rd, 1926, Coolidge Dam preparatory work opens. Other news articles that spoke of newly formed irrigation districts in the valleys and how the federal government was helping the Pima Indians with the water rights. All that was printed in the newspapers about the starving Pimas would soon change. The Gila River Indian community had a vision. And that vision was to restore the water back into the Gila River. How would they do that? The San Carlos irrigation project was already established, and the community was provided groundwater wells to help the community continue agriculture, but that just wasn't enough. In 1992, the community, through resolution, created the Central Arizona Project Indian Distribution Division, but later changed it through a resolution in 95 to the Pima Maricopa Irrigation Project. PMIP would become the first tribally built irrigation system. They were in charge of the design, construction, operation, and maintaining the 2,400-mile irrigation system that will deliver water to 146,330 acres of community agricultural land. PMIP was also charged with the plan, design, construct to deliver water to recharge the underground water aquifers throughout the community. So just the photo in the slide is a photo from the managed aquifer recharge site. Here's the map of the PMIP delivery system throughout the community. If you remember the prehistoric canal map, this modern canal system follows the flow of what was once free-flowing water. The managed aquifer recharge stations are not on this map so far. They have built 2 of them, one located in the village of Blackwater and the other located in Washington. The Gila River MAR 5, what they call it, MAR 5, opened in March of 2019 in Hashinkuk. That was built as an interpretive trail that would share the community's history, to learn about the teaching of various plants and animals that we would see in this trail, and a place to share O'odham and Peepash cultures, and an important resource for basket weavers. And most importantly, the return of the water into the Gila River. The vision that the community had has now come to fruition. Where the water flows, life grows. On December 10th, 2004, the Gila River Indian Community Water Settlement Act was signed by President George W. Bush. The Hoogum Heritage Center in their collection has the official document, the pen that was used to sign the act, and even the United States flag that was flown at the White House at the time of the signing. The history on the fight for the water took generations and perseverance from various elected officials to finally settle on an agreement that would benefit the community and for future generations. The water settlement will restore underground aquifers and riparian areas, provide water to expand and continue agriculture and the revitalization of traditional plants. The Gila River Indian Community Historic Water Settlement of 2004 would bring an estimated 653,500 acre feet of water to the community in various capacities. Where did the water go? From the free natural flow of the Gila River that fed into dirt canals and ditches, slowly turned into cement line, electric powered, open water and underground irrigation delivery systems. And in recognition and the celebration of Native American Recognition Month or Indigenous Peoples Day, Angela and I are honoring the achievements of our ancestors made in the Salt and Gila valleys, sharing the importance of Shudak, our water, and sharing our himnag, our way of life. That water, an important natural resource to each and every one of us. Thank you.
All right, everyone, we're going to have a break here for a couple minutes, and when we get back, we will have our discussion panel. To the folks who are attending remotely on WebEx, we're going to set up a couple of computers here and have our discussions on there. If things don't go as planned, we deeply apologize, but this is kind of uncharted territory for us. So we're going to break here and get that technology set up, and hopefully you guys can play along. All right, so everyone take care. conference.
Video. Yes. All right. So that's good. And then
Mhm.
I will be seeing the slides on here.
Yes, exactly. So there are All right, hello, folks at home. So we're just about ready here. People are trickling back into the room after their break, and we've got our discussion panel going. And I can hear somebody's got their speaker on over there. So whoever's got their speaker on the panel, you'll want to mute that. So just another moment, folks.
All right. If you would just give me some check. I can hear the noise on 2, 3. Jonathan, the microphone.
Testing, testing. Hello. Can you hear me okay?
This is Gary, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I think so. Hello, hello. Am I on now?
You are perfect. All right, go.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience in the room as we work through some of these kinks, and thank you online for listening to all the tests. But we've got our panel discussion ready here. So folks in the room sitting at the front of the PGM auditorium here, we have Jerry Huckleberry, Bruce Phillips, Kyle Hudson, and Chris Castledine, who are going to discuss today's conference. So I'm going to turn this over to them, and they're just going to let me know when they want me to advance the slides. But otherwise, hang tight. Someone's got their volume up still. So.
Okay.
I said the Grand Canyon too.
Yes, I am. So Bruce needs to turn down his speaker down there. We're going to keep looking over at him. Well, thank you, everybody. This was a great set of papers today, and we're going to be talking about the papers in a few moments, but first, each of us are going to give some remarks, some of which are maybe not directly related to all the papers, but we will get to the papers. So when Dan asked me to be part of this group and I was thinking about this, I was thinking about, well, there's been so much that's been going on these last 14 years since the 2007 Canal Conference that Bruce Phillips organized, that I was just like, well, gosh, we got to do something to talk about this. So I was just thinking about this in terms of the greatest hits of canal irrigation research over the last 14 years. So this is going to be just kind of a lightning round style presentation here of what I kind of came up with and shared this with the other discussants. So I think for the most part, kind of speak for the group. So let's go ahead and advance the slide there, Dan. So just kind of getting a look at this. Where did these greatest hits happen? So looking on the map here, I'm going to be talking real briefly about 5 parts of southern Arizona here. Starting here in the Phoenix Basin, or what we call the core of the Holcomb archaeological tradition, Lower Salt River, Middle Gila River, Queen Creek. I'm going to move down to talk about Tucson area and the Middle Santa Cruz River as well. I'm also going to touch some on the Upper Gila River in Safford because there are canal systems, very extensive canal systems in that zone. So next slide. So let's start here, Lower Salt Valley, and you can't start in the Lower Salt Valley without Jerry Howard. So Jerry, thanks again for coming. Jerry's retired now. None of us would be here without Jerry's insights and work to date. So Jerry, thank you again. It's always been a pleasure working with you, but I did want to highlight, even though he did present at the 07 conference and he did talk about his dissertation, which he had just published, But his thoughts and his investigations on the social organization of irrigation agriculture were really quite influential for quite a few of us, including myself in my own dissertation research, which was published later than his. So I want to recognize that Jerry really did some pivotal work, not just on the mapping of the canal systems, but on really looking at what was it that people were doing to organize themselves to construct, maintain, and farm on these irrigation systems. But the other thing that was ongoing and didn't finish until well after '07 was the Riverview project that Jerry was running in Mesa up near modern day Riverview shopping mall. But this is a picture of him standing next to one of those large canals and what was then thought to be Canal System 1, and which I touched on a little earlier, that Chris has teased out. There's actually probably 4 separate canal systems within what we think of as Canal System 1. But none of that insight would have been possible without Jerry's project in Riverview and other areas. So I want to make sure that's right off the top of the bat a greatest hit. So let's go to the next slide. The next one's got to be right here that we talked about already with Kathy Henderson and her team with Desert Archaeology on the Phoenix SkyTrain project, working with Gary Huckleberry here, as well as Hosky, Shasma, Connie Darby. This team and really did some fantastic work here. And I won't go into the details since Kathy went through it already, but it is really important that they were able to expand further on our understanding of this upper section of the headworks of Canal System 2. Kathy talked a lot about the luminescence dating that she did, the team did. I mean, really critical to come up with this. And as she and Gary and others have shown, indeed, there were some canals that were destroyed by floods. So this is an important part of looking at the sequence of development of these canal irrigation systems. And then again, on the right there, as I mentioned earlier, this irrigated field system was just really phenomenal. We'd never seen anything in this kind of detail before. And as I had suggested in my own paper, I mean, I think we as archaeologists need to continue focusing on these field systems and really trying to tease out more information that we can get from that. I really see that as a really good spot of future development. Next slide. And as I mentioned, this one, I forgot I had this slide here showing Kathy standing next to this exposure of the Woodbury North Canal. I'm not sure if she showed this, but that lighter colored soil area just shows you how massive this canal was. I think she said, and Gary mentioned, that this is like the largest canal that was built in the lower Salt River. I mean, it's immense. And this isn't even the whole thing because this is truncated by modern development. So you can see here the work that they did to expose this. And on the right, this work that Gary and others did to kind of really tease out this flood deposit, and dating that event was really key part of this study. Next slide. And moving over to Canal System 1, and I touched on this earlier, but I just want to highlight this again. The work that Jerry and all the others before him did to kind of really give us the bulk of what Canal System 1 used to look like on the left there, and still really kind of does look like this, but on this right here, this guy sitting to my right, Chris, finished his dissertation research, and I'm sure teased this out with Jerry's input as well, but you can see there those color codes there for the 4 separate canal systems, which seem to be making up what we're calling Canal System 1. So I think this is going to be another really influential study that as we move forward, hopefully more work can be done in Mesa, Tempe, and Chandler to kind of help really tease out the details of this. And I'll also point out that his dissertation itself really does a nice job of looking at if there was any water insufficiency problems during these major transitions between the pre-classic and classic period, as well as the early and the late classic periods. And I'm just going to briefly summarize that. I think basically Chris concluded that there really weren't any major issues with water sufficiency at those transitions. So there were other elements contributing to what we were seeing in terms of changes in the settlement structure and social organization. All right, next slide. Hit a couple more of Lower Salt Valley projects. On the left here, this is another project Bruce Phillips was involved with. Just like Gary, he's pretty much everywhere. This was a Paleo West project in the VA Center west of here, where they got an exposure of the Hagenstadt Canal further downstream from where Desert exposed their canal segment. I'm sure when this report comes out, it will be really useful. This was just a couple of years ago. And then on the right there, we heard today from HDR, work in progress, looking at these Pueblo Viejo canals that they looked at in South Phoenix. I'm looking forward to seeing the results of that. Next slide. And then also, as I touched on, in the northern Phoenix Basin, so on these smaller water courses, Cave Creek, New River, Agua Fria River, that map on the left there is a kind of highlights some of these zones where these smaller irrigated as well as floodwater farm fields, probably both at the same time in many cases, where residents living in the northern part of the basin were growing crops, maize, other crops in these small field farms, basically right along these small water courses. And as Hosky and others have pointed out, in some cases, this grading of sediment as you farm these for hundreds of years basically develops new soils, new fields, and you're actually building fields in effect. So really interesting research, and I hope we see more of that. Next slide. Okay. Let's move to the Middle Gila River Valley, where, as I mentioned, I've done a lot of work here for the last 25 plus years. And so the Cultural Resource Management Program has been involved in doing this type of research for about that long. So this slide here is just a snapshot map of what we project as 13 to 15 separate canal systems that were built and maintained by Hohokam in prehistory along the Middle Gila River. We were able to do all kinds of efforts with this, in addition to multiple excavated canal segments, reconstructing irrigated field areas, and we do have good absolute dating on a lot of these canal systems now. At this point, we are seeing that the earliest canals were built a little later in the Middle Gila Valley than in the lower Salt Valley. So in contrast to here, which I'm pretty sure Gary and Kathy, earliest canals are 1 to 200 AD, somewhere around that Red Mountain phase in lower Salt Valley, unless I'm incorrect. It's a little later, a little bit more like 3 to 400 AD, so probably late Red Mountain phase, maybe even early Vaki phase before you really see the first canals being built.
More than 300.
Is it really? Okay. Got it. Yes. Okay, so just in case people couldn't hear that, yeah, just to repeat, Kathy Henderson is saying that the dates are a little closer to 300 AD. So maybe a little bit, still probably a little earlier than Gila River, but maybe a little bit more contemporary. So thank you. I wasn't quite aware of that. So thanks. Other elements here, if we want to move on to the next slide here, Dan. So we really focused in on some of these canal systems like the Snaketown Canal System, which I looked at in detail, looking at both the development of the canal system itself as well as the settlements. You can see Snaketown in the middle of this map here, and really looking closely at what's happening in these areas in between the pre-classic to classic period and on through the end of the classic period. Next slide. I already mentioned this, but just want to re-highlight irrigated fields. We've actually documented these fields, not just in the Snaketown system, but as I mentioned in the Upper Santan area, Blackwater on the eastern end, and even in the Casa Grande Ruins area. So these fields are there. You need to be looking for them. And I guarantee you will have new insights because, again, this is really within the last 20, 25 years that people have really been focusing on this. So I encourage everybody to think a lot about this. Next slide. Other canal related, this is a snapshot of the tail end of the GRU Casa Grande canal system near Casa Grande Ruins. The red lines are the sort of now understood projections of the canal system. There's been a lot of excavations that we have done in this area, as well as statistical research. Bill Deaver and also Rio Salado Archaeology, Glenn Rice's, we've gotten several nice cuts, good absolute dates on these canals extending into the 1400s that are being used to that time extent. I'll also give a shout out to ACS to the project at the very upper end of the Middle Gila Valley for a reclamation project where they found a pre-classic period canal segment that's probably a precursor to the later Casa Grande canal system, but they're really the first good tracking and evidence of a canal at that high end part of the river valley. Next slide. All right, reservoirs. Going to talk just real briefly here. So we've been doing a lot of finding of these reservoirs, particularly along these Santan Mountains. This slide on the left shows a view of the Piedmont of the western Santan Mountains, where these washes, the runoff in these washes are being channeled into these reservoirs in lower Santan Village. A little hard to see, but the dark blue spots, you can see 4 of them there, are these zones for providing domestic water to village residents in this area. Slide on the right is just sort of a reconstruction of the development of one of those reservoir areas. So in addition to providing domestic water, these reservoirs are also helping to protect the canal works below them by basically serving as somewhat of a flood protection system, as well as providing domestic water supply. All right, next slide. And other reservoirs, jumping up to Queen Creek on the other side of the Santan Mountains, where Jacobs and Logan Simpson did some work along Riggs Road extension in Queen Creek. And both projects documented this extremely large reservoir that was also capturing runoff from the other side of the Santan Mountains. Gary Huckleberry was involved in this as well. Right there, you're seeing some slides, plan views, and then sort of a picture profile that Logan put together, I believe. And then at the bottom there, this is among the largest prehistoric reservoirs documented in Arizona, with a capacity of up to 317,000 gallons. And potentially could have held water year round and provided water to up to 530 people annually. So really interesting study. Just want to highlight this, looking at these reservoirs and these sort of auxiliary features, as you will, to canal systems. Next slide. Okay, let's move to the middle Santa Cruz. And I showed this slide earlier, but just want to highlight Las Capas. I mean, the site that keeps on giving. This is just a phenomenal project. Part 2, that photo on the left there is Jonathan Mabry from the first part of the project back in the late 90s, I'm pretty sure. But I mean, what can you say? I mean, to me, the discovery and, expansion of our knowledge of this early agricultural period with the canal irrigation and the field systems is, I mean, in my mind, the #1 top discovery since the National Historic Preservation Act created CRM industry, in my mind. Yeah, I think so. So just want to point out that this is absolutely one of the biggest, greatest hits in my mind of Southern Arizona canal archaeology. And the next slide, again, just as a recap on the Rillito fan site, in addition to that field that I highlighted earlier, Gary and others with SWCA really keyed in on these canals and doing a great job on documenting and dating these. And what you're looking at here is the oldest known canal in the U.S. Southwest and maybe in North America, if I'm not incorrect, Gary. I can't remember how you all came out of this, but roughly probability age of 1500 BC. So again, I mean, 25 years ago, we didn't think there was anything prior to 1 AD, and now we've got 1500 BC of irrigation history. So it basically doubles the history of irrigation agriculture in the U.S. Southwest. So just a phenomenal discovery. Next slide. And then this is just a repeat, just to kind of highlight again, these irrigated fields. This is an early agricultural period field, same site, Rillito fan site. And again, with these footprints, which is just, just a real, I mean, just the personal kind of being able to see that in person, I think is just a really phenomenal effect. So another really phenomenal finding here. Next slide. Just a few other projects in Middle Santa Cruz. Just want to highlight, of course, Gary's involved with almost all this, so I basically should just have him do this. But on the left there is a study Gary did with Tierra right-of-way at the dairy site on the Piedmont of the Tortolita Mountains, where they have a canal system diverting runoff water for agricultural purposes. So Really interesting study, and that's an early ceramic period. So again, pre-Hohokam canal system. This middle photo was this year, Desert Archaeology working in the Silver Bell Road project. Henry Wallace there and Gary also. This is like an adobe lined canal segment, which I've never seen, but it's on either side of a wash that was intersecting this canal system. And they, I guess, were reinforcing the canal on that area with adobe. So again, just the level of, you know, hydroengineering and know-how that goes into these is just phenomenal. And then just briefly at that map on the right is one of Gary's maps, just kind of highlighting all these various canals in the Tucson Basin that have been documented over the past 20 to 30 years. And you can just see all those black dots on there. A lot of work is being done. So we've just learned so much. Next slide. All right, and just to kind of wrap things up, I don't want to forget Safford Valley, just to highlight a couple of really neat things going on up there. This is work on the Bajada, or the alluvial fan of Mount Graham, or the Pinaleno Mountains, that Jim Neely from UT Austin and his colleagues, including Don Lancaster, have done over the last 20 years, but most recently they've been publishing some on this. All these blue lines you see on here are canals that are emanating off of these, basically run off these creeks coming down off Mount Graham. There's 12 separate systems that they've documented now, with the total canal lengths exceeding 120 kilometers. And these are being used from what we'd call the pre-classic through the classic periods. Just a really interesting series of canal systems. And these photos on the right kind of highlight one of these cool aspects of these canals coming down along these Bajada ridges that you can see on the top slide. And on the bottom side, they basically look like they're hanging off of the edge of these Bajada ridges. So again, I mean, the level of engineering going into these canal systems is just remarkable. And Jim Neely and others have done a great job with that. And then one more slide. Some of this was touched on at the last canal conference by Desert Archaeology, Jeff Clark, and Tierra Right Away, Anik Glasgow, as well as Gary Huckleberry, and also Fred Niles on the Desert Project. In the Safford Valley, in the floodplain, there are lots of canal systems that we're only beginning to know about because there's been so little archaeology done there, because most of it is private land. But when you do stick a trench in the ground, you're finding canals, and there's canals dating to the very late part of the early agricultural period, early formative, all the way through into, you know, what we'd call pre-classic and classic. So the canals are there. And they have yet to be studied anywhere near to the degree that we have here. So I see Safford Valley canal irrigation research being a major area that we can know a lot more about. Okay, that's one more slide, and that's it on my take on the greatest hits of canal irrigation research.
Unmute for those who are out there in digital land. Turn my camera down here. Okay. Well, Kyle, thanks for taking the time to pull that together. That truly is a greatest hits listing of some recent developments in looking at ancient water management here in Arizona. Before I start, I want to thank the organizers of the symposium for inviting me, and then Pueblo Grande for hosting this symposium. It's an honor to be here, and it's really nice to see some old friends and familiar faces today. In the 10 minutes that I have, I just want to say first, I've really enjoyed the papers that I've heard today, and I try to keep up with what's going on with studies in HOCOM and earlier water management, and even in water management areas outside, excuse me, the HOCOM area, and such as La Playa and in New Mexico. But it's hard. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's really neat, and it's neat to see some of these new developments and know that our knowledge base is increasing quite a bit since the last time we had this symposium back in 2007. It's great to hear about some of the new discoveries and the things that we, the perspectives that we're getting both from Western science and also the indigenous perspectives on water management. And, certainly is a topic that is, I think, appeals to a wider audience, not just the archaeological audience, just because of some of the things I think Dan at the beginning today talked about in terms of growing population, climate change, and water shortages here in the Southwest. So I'm sure we'll see more of this type of research continuing, and hopefully we'll be around to listen in on those discoveries 14 years from now or whenever that will be. I originally came in here, I was kind of asked to, since there aren't really any projects today that were presented from Tucson per se, to sort of update people on what's been going on in the Tucson Basin area. But Kyle sort of beat me to the punch. I mean, he showed some great shots down there. And so some of the slides I have are going to look very familiar to you. Some of the ones that Kyle just showed. But maybe I can provide a little additional context to it as well. I also wanted to, I'm a geoarchaeologist and my background is in soils and landforms and things. So one of the issues I've always been strongly interested in is, this idea of salinization and the Hohokam decline. It's been going around for a long time, as Chris was, presented today. So that was one paper in particular I wanted to allocate a little bit of time to address because I agree with Chris and Dave that, it just doesn't make sense that this would have been a problem for people that practice irrigation farming for over 1,000 years and inherited from people before them for several thousand years before that. The salinization process is much too rapid, and they developed methods for dealing with it. And probably they fallowed fields and shifted and then waited for water tables to go back down and then flush the salts out. But they may have had other types of methods that there could be some physical evidence for that we might want to try to keep an eye out for. And so one of the things I think we might want to try to keep a mind to think about in the future is, those areas in the lower Salt River Valley that historically had shallow water tables and problems of salinization and alkalinization. Those would be areas that likely the Hohokam had to deal with those issues. And might there be canals that look a little strange? In other words, might there be wastewater or drainage canals there that were used to get rid of that water to help facilitate reclamation of those soils? What would those canals look like? I don't know for sure. I know that over the years I have seen some strange canals that don't look like they're their typical distribution field laterals to go to a field. They look more like they are getting rid of excess water or draining the soil. One recently, Mark Chenault's in the back, we saw one that's very unusual in an area that was historically had shallow groundwater and soil salinity problems. So I'm hoping that for all of us who are working in some of these areas to kind of keep an eye out for those strange looking canals that might be empirical evidence for salinization mitigation by the Hohokam. All right, so the other thing, I don't control the slides, do I? Dan, may I have the next slide? Okay, yeah, so let me try to touch on some of the recent Tucson discoveries since the last meeting without being too redundant with Kyle's greatest hits. That figure on the left, it kind of summarizes some of the canals that have been discovered in the Tucson Basin area. A couple things to remember. The Santa Cruz River, as it exits the Tucson Basin, I think they estimate the discharge on that annual discharge. This is an intermittent stream. It's not like a perennial stream like the salt before it was dammed. The total annual discharge, I think, is 20,000 cubic acre feet, 20,000 acre feet. Compare that to the lower Salt River, and I think it's 1 million acre feet. So not surprisingly, the canal systems that we have in Tucson area are small compared to what you have up here. But as Kyle said, we have some really old ones. So I'd like to say Phoenix has the big ones, but we've got some of the old ones. The other thing is that, Phoenix has this tremendous, because a lot of them are very large, these canal systems, they were visible when Euro-American settlers came. These systems have been, we've mapped out continuously these alignments through, these early maps, through historical era photography. You can't really do that in the Tucson area. Most of these canals are buried in the floodplain, especially those that are going back, 3,000 years. And so, we just get short segments, really short segments, and try to connect the pieces to try to understand the system as a whole. And that's been a challenge. Ostensibly, these are hierarchically branching channels, gravitational flow, much like the ones up in the Salt River Valley. But we've got a narrower floodplain and we have smaller pieces of the puzzle. So that's something we're still trying to define, how these systems were built, how they evolved through time. Excuse me. Next slide, please. So getting back to this canal that Kyle brought up at the Rito fan site. Yes, I like to call this a probable canal. I think it is a canal, but I just want to point out that it's too easy to sit there and say, oh, I've got one stratigraphic exposure of a parabolic channel in the floodplain. It's got to be a canal. I pulled some charcoal out of it. It's an old canal, right? Because we can't map these, we only get like short segments or single exposure to these canals. We really got to think, could this be a natural channel? Now, in this case, I'm arguing that it's probably a cultural channel. It's an actual canal, because this is the geomorphic location. This is where geology becomes important. All the layered sediments that you see around this parabolic channel are from the Rito, and we know that based on the mineralogy of the sediment. It has a different bedrock source area in the watershed. The fill of that channel is much more volcanic and mixed. It's coming from the Santa Cruz River. And just based on geomorphic principles, it seems unlikely that a single small natural flood channel of the Santa Cruz River would climb up onto the Rito fan by itself. So based on that context, that makes me think it's actually a canal. The other thing is, okay, it's a piece of charcoal in the canal that could be redeposited. So, and we've seen that often where you get an old age and it's like, well, that's not the actual age of the depositional event. We didn't get a chance to do luminescence dating on this. We have just the charcoal. The good thing about the Rito fan site is we have very good dates for the whole stratigraphic sequence. So we can do an age depth model. And this canal is over 3 meters deep. And based on that age depth model, it supports an age of anywhere from 1400 to 1500 BC, which is consistent with the radiocarbon date. So, again, I think it's a probable canal. I think the radiocarbon date is pretty good. So yeah, we've got 1500 BC irrigation. This also is consistent with stuff that Jonathan Mabry has dated, not based on direct ages from the fill, but from stratigraphic correlation. So we can feel confident by saying probably, yeah, 1500 BC. How much before that? Don't know. We've got maize going back to what, 2200 BC now, 2100, 2200 BC. How soon did they go from floodwater farming to actual intensive agriculture and water management? That's an important research question that I think we want to try to pursue in the future, because that's a big hinge point in human history. I mean, obviously adopting agriculture is, but shifting from horticulture into much more labor-intensive water management, that's also another hinge point. That's important to try to date if we can. Next slide, please. And this is also Rito fan site. This is really cool. Kyle already talked about the canid prints and the human prints in this. This field system and canals are only about a meter and a half below the surface. So, and it dates about 600 BC. It's early Cienega phase. Here, I want to talk about the value of a good backhoe operator. It was this guy laying on his belly that really allowed us to expose this in 3D, Dan Arnett. But this garnered so much attention by the public. When they came out and they saw these fields and the footprints, we had just hundreds of people, or I should say SWCA did, opening this up to the public. And the people had so much, we're just really enthralled by seeing this. Next slide, Dan. I think, yeah, that's just the tracks you can see going across there. And I think it was Kyle said earlier about just to be able to see these prints in there is just phenomenal. It puts you back in time. Next slide, please. Kyle also talked about the Silver Bell Road project the desert is doing right now. I'll just point out that we discovered a reservoir that it partly underlies Silver Bell Road. You could not see this topographically. There's no surface evidence of it. We just, by luck, hit the upper fill of it. This thing extends down 3 meters in depth. We don't have the boundaries of it completely defined yet because it extends beyond the project corridor. Interestingly about this one, a couple things. It is not sitting in the path of that wash on the left. It's actually up on an alluvial fan ridge. So we think a canal had to bring water upslope off that wash to fill it, rather than just putting it in the pathway of natural flow. So we think it was fed by a canal. Of course, that's outside our project area. We might get an opportunity to take another look at that section of road later. The other thing of interest about this is there's a good chance this is pre-ceramic, or at least it's pre-Hohokam. It's associated with a site that has a lot of early agriculture, early ceramic features, but there were no ceramics in the fill of this. Next slide, please. There were no ceramics in the fill of this, and we had these beautiful stratified silts and clays and sands, and but some of the only features we had were up at the very top after it had filled in, and those are about the same stratigraphic level as these early ceramic features. So this could be an early agriculture Cienega phase reservoir, which I don't think we've documented to my knowledge. I may be wrong on that, but it's a big one, and it's pre-Hohokam, and I think that these are so subtle in the landscape and easy to miss. And so we hit also, there had been 2 other Bajada canals coming off the Bajada, feeding fields and ostensibly more reservoirs like this. So this is something also, I think, in the future, in terms of rainfall harvesting and things of that sort, very, very relevant to today. Next slide, please. We also have riverine canals on this project. Here's one. This is the Adobe Line Canal, Kyle. This is an aerial view looking at the Bajada coming down to the edge of the Santa Cruz River floodplain. That little red dot is where this Adobe Line section is. So I think they weren't doing it to protect the canal from floods on that wash, because I don't think that would happen, but to stabilize the channel from scour because it's crossing loose sandy gravel materials. Next slide, I think, is a picture of the actual canal, which you showed a picture as well. I've never seen an Adobe lined one like this either, at least here in the Southwest. So that's pretty cool. Next slide, please. Okay, so I got an email from a colleague of ours, Dave Greenwald, with the Jornada Research Institute in New Mexico. And he says, hey, you guys know about the canals that we've got out here near Alamogordo? And he wanted to make sure that we bring attention to this. So he sent me a couple slides, and I said, yeah, I'll put a good word for you. So now moving beyond the Tucson Basin, out here off US 70, I guess in the rough from Alamogordo up to Ruidoso, the Creekside Canal System. He's got a series of these canals that you can actually trace out segments at the surface that are associated with a series of settlements. Fred, have you seen this? I thought you would. Yeah, okay, so you've seen this. At least one reservoir connected to it. Based on the settlements, these date about AD 600 to 900. He sees these ceremonial or ritual precincts that are defined by kivas, big grand kivas. And Dave says these are the farthest southeast and oldest kivas that he knows in New Mexico. And so they're continuing to do an interdisciplinary research project on this with soil scientists, geologists, palynologists, the whole 9 yards. And there could actually be multiple systems actually part of this. Next slide, please. He sent me a couple pictures. Here's one of the canals that went from the reservoir down to the fields. That's an oblique shot looking down. One more slide. Next slide, please. This is a different canyon, or Agua Fria Canyon system. So it's not just at Creekside. There are other canal systems that are coming out of the Sacramento Mountains there, apparently. And this is the Agua Fria Canyon system. This water obviously has a high carbonate content. This is a travertine line canal segment that's been exhumed. And the only other one I've seen in Arizona is at Montezuma Well. And you don't get a lot of these really high carbonate rich springs supplying these canals or waters. But here's one. So the point is that there are quite a few people looking at canals now beyond just the Hohokam, region, and up on the Colorado Plateau as well. I've got a colleague who believes he has a canal up near Dinosaur National Monument. If you know where that is. And so that needs further testing. So water management goes back at least 3,500 years, right? At least in the Southwest here. So it's been around a long time. It'd be surprising if a lot of other people were not also practicing canal irrigation elsewhere in the Southwest. And I've run out of time, so I'm going to leave it at that. And maybe later, if you have questions, we can discuss those.
Do a little troubleshooting here, Dan, because it didn't work quite the same as it did the other day. Are we good? All right. Let's see.
I see you.
Good. I don't have anything as cool as these guys got by any means. I am going to diverge a little bit from irrigation specifically and then tie back in. I would like to extol the virtues of phase one testing. As archaeologists, we understand that the primary purpose of doing phase one testing is to determine if we need to go to phase two. And so usually that means digging a bunch of trenches, seeing if there's any features, and then either writing a quick report and saying, no, we don't need to do anything, or then we go back to the drawing board and come up with a treatment plan for the field work. Now, during phase one, at least me personally, this is the opportunity, my best opportunity to get the most information about the landscape. I have multiple vertical exposures, which are the diachronic record. It is the history of the landscape out there. By being able to record all of that stratigraphy, not only do I get a diachronic perspective, by being able to trace out those various layers that are being deposited through time, I can also look at a synchronic perspective by tracing them out and looking at differences across the landscape. When I'm called out during phase two, and the excavations are essentially a single layer where all of the artifacts and features are being found, I have only a synchronic perspective. And it's very difficult to try and do any sort of landscape reconstruction based on the phase two, unless additional trenches are excavated at that time. So I would like to not only ask you to include the geomorphologist on the front end, but also when you're in the field, if there's not a geomorph out there, take care to record that stratigraphy. Even if you're not finding archaeological features, it may help us to understand why people aren't there, especially in areas where we are expecting to find people. Good example are the floodplains. If we are opening up lots of trenches in an area between sites, we know that there were people there. We know that between Sky Harbor Airport and La Ciudad, there's lots of irrigation going on. We know that people are out there. So perhaps by getting that stratigraphic information and coming up with a landscape reconstruction, it'll help us better understand why we're not seeing people. Those may be field areas. So please include the geomorphs at the beginning, and if not, do take time to record as much of that stratigraphy as possible. Depths of horizons, good descriptions, and also at that point, when early in the phase one, to have one person in particular, usually a crew chief or the project director, come up with a standardized nomenclature for that stratigraphy across the site, convey that to the crew who will be then documenting those trenches so that we don't have 15 different systems for every single crew member that's in the field. Because often it's not only difficult, sometimes impossible to go back and try and link everything together, trying to figure out what one person saw as opposed to another person, and coming up with a unified picture. All right, to get back to the canals, and this is a specific instance where the phase one and having a geomorph out there during the phase one is going to be helpful. Dan? So this was at the VA Center, and at the upper portion of this field profile is what would be a phase one trench. You know, normal 5 foot, 1.5 meter trench. And at the left of this field drawing, those bold lines are there so that post field we could see what was there. After a couple of days, most of these lines were barely discernible after it had dried out. There's a lot of dashed lines in there. And then as you move to the right, the jagged lines are marking facies changes, where we're seeing the clays closer to what look like small canals are becoming sandier and continue to get sandier. And then there are small pockets all the way to the right, which you can't really see on here, but they're there. And so if we were to take this at face value, we would see, you know, some small nested canals, field laterals. And then what is to the very far left is a wedge that looks to be going into the bottom of the trench. It's just an anomaly, looked like an anomaly, basically easily discounted. Having seen this, we did a deep trench, Dan. And so from the toe of the elephant, we wound up finding this massive canal. And had we stopped at the single trench and recorded those field laterals and the anomaly to the left, we would have missed this entirely, especially after a couple of days of drying out, not being able to see it anymore. So I guess that's my sort of soapbox, if you will, a spiel about the benefits of the phase one and having the geomorphologist come out during the phase one. And so when you are in phase one, don't discount anomalies as just, you know, that's some weird soil and then move on. Take time to investigate it, especially if you're seeing these things that dip down into the bottom of the trench. Dan? I'm not sure how well it's going to show up in this exposure here, but central left is an iron manganese stain at the very bottom of the very large canal that we found out at on Central Avenue at the light rail project. It dips down into the trench and then comes up almost 5 meters later, comes up at the other side. And then it's all filled with this anomalous sandy fill that taken alone wouldn't look like much, especially with all the historic disturbance that it's directly above all of the sand that's at the bottom there of what we suspect is Canal Viejo, a very large canal. So these are things as archaeologists, during a phase one, you should be looking for: dipping strata, changes in a single layer over a span, especially if it seems to be contained, maybe the top of a very large canal or a reservoir. And I think beyond that, I really didn't have much more than that. So thank you.
Great. So, unlike the field dogs next to me, my career's mostly been in books. So, the amount of brain trust that has gone into my studies, many of them are here: Fred Niles, Jerry Howard, Gary, Kyle, Bruce. They've all touched on my dissertation research and other research I've done. So, I'm really appreciative to that. And it's the amount of things that we learned early on and the amount of things that we've got to here wouldn't have been possible without these individuals, and going back to Frank Midvale and Omar Turney and back to the Hemingway expedition, which I'll touch on. So what I'm going to talk about today is one of my interests being the intersection between social political authority and irrigation control. All right, yeah. And so this is a greatest hits, I guess, like as Kyle said, with his, kind of what we thought about the structure of irrigation and how that intersected or went with the control of society and control of the canals themselves. So early on, these are two maps. Both of these images, the map on the left of the screen, that's on the left, and then the illustration on the right that comes from Howries, who's also part of the canal story, from his dissertation, the book version of it from the Peabody, but showing the Hemingway, a crew from the Hemingway expedition going out and seeing the importance of canals. And you can see that they dug out the entire canal. It's slightly different than we do now, but there is analogies to what we do still. And so the structure that you see on the left and the map really set the foundation for how we understand HOCOM irrigation and kind of the structure of the main canals. And their main point was that Patrick and others pointed out were these really huge main canals, and those seem to be feeding everything. And so HOCOM irrigation, which it wasn't HOCOM at that time, the canal builders themselves going out to Los Muertos, they were building these really large systems. So they hadn't yet started thinking about how are they organizing themselves. All right, Dan. So we move into kind of the Woodbury accretional growth model. And for those that went on the tour today at the Park of the Four Waters, Woodbury North and South. So he has that article in 1960, and he follows it up in 61, talking about those particular canals, talking about how this growth wasn't all at one time, but it took time, and that as they needed more acreage, they would add on to the canal in an accretional manner. And so that was followed up by Lyndon Nicholas. So these images are from Nicholas and Neitzel in '84. Just kind of showing the progression of the growth of irrigation south of the river. The red arrows are depicting the same canal over time. So the top left is the pioneer period going down to the bottom right being the classic period. And you can just see she's depicting like how Woodbury described it, that they're just adding on to the main canals and they're extending out and bringing more land. Go ahead. Then we come to Jerry Howard, who says that's bunk. That's just not how irrigation can work. Hydrologically, you just can't add on to large canals. And so what we see on the left is from Jerry's dissertation, and both these images are from Jerry's dissertation, that you have to maintain a certain flow, the optimal gradient. And the only way you can do that is with the main canals, at least, you have to rebuild your main canal. So these multiple canals showing up, like Kathy showed, and others, that you have to reconstruct the entire main canal if you're going to extend out or change the location of it. You can have diversionary branch canals coming off of that after, but it needs to be one effort at one time. So it's an extremely high amount of coordination and planning to go, we're going to build a canal from here at Pueblo Grande all the way out to La Ciudad or to Las Colinas within a certain amount of time, which on top of that, you're having to worry about your fields. The other thing that Jerry did, that building on what people did before, is kind of start getting up to the structure of irrigation canals themselves. So the image on the right being, you have a main canal coming off, distribution canals, and then below that, at least on the north side with Canal System 2 here, that you have the field turnouts and then going out to fields. So he's showing a hierarchical system or step system for bringing water from the river to the field. Okay. So we come to the great fat days of the 1980s CRM projects, and really what got irrigation studies in the Hohokam area going. That a lot of what we know about Hohokam irrigation, even though it's been supplemented extremely, and that's something that Kyle showed and something that Gary showed, but the basis of kind of Hohokam organization and structure is all based right here. You're sitting on top of what we understand of Hohokam that's been supplemented. And so you see on the left here, this is from the Hohokam Millennium, it's Fish and Fish, talking about Thiessen polygons, that you have these zones built all around. The focus is on the platform mounds themselves. That each platform mound is an administrative center that controls their little part of the canal. Jerry, within his thesis, talked about the administrative zones. So on the right here, you see an administrative zone at Las Colinas, and at that time it would have been Grand Canal Ruins area, because it's shifted north from La Ciudad, and then here at Pueblo Grande. So you have, in the 80s, you start seeing the trickling in of how are people structuring themselves and who's controlling the irrigation systems. And something that Jerry had said is, each one of these administrative zones has a say, but ultimately it's Pueblo Grande that controls everything because they're at the head gates. And so, and they had that people could be coming here because this is the largest platform mounds north of the river to kind of discuss how to work things out. Okay. So then we had kind of the turn of the 21st century. There was a reevaluation, and getting into what Jerry's dissertation talks about. You have Hunt and others in 2005, where they talk about the nitty gritty of what do farmers actually do, not just who's controlling it. Yeah, control is important, but what are the farmers doing to organize themselves to move water from the river to their fields? And so Hunt and others, and even before this, back in the 70s, Hunt was talking about this, coming up with the term of a chief administrative officer. So you have something that Dan had talked about and others talked about with the ditch master, or the person that's in charge of moving water. But there's certain, within the ethnographic record, there are certain jobs that you're either born into or you're elected to by your fellow irrigators that you're expected to do. And so there was a real realization that, yeah, there may be certain people that have some authority, but it's really spread a lot more. And something that Kyle Woodson talked about in his dissertation is just labor requirements. So you can't just say building the canals. No, that's one part of it. That's an important part, but there's also your yearly upkeep of canals. And so that was a major step forward for understanding Hohokam irrigation, that both building and maintaining the canals is integral to the functionality of a long-term system. So that's kind of the background, and I guess this is my part of the soapbox, of my thoughts on Hohokam irrigation and social political authority. So here is a illustration for my dissertation. This is the standard irrigation units, the different parts, and this is even though I term this a standard irrigation unit, this goes back to Bruce Massey in his science article in 1981, his work for the Hohokam Expressway, getting into what Jerry found, and then what Kyle found with his field sizes down along the Gila. You can see these things in the aerial photos, starting in the 1930s all the way up until it gets kind of dicey after 1949. And the black and white photos are really the best for that. And so the presentation earlier showing the drawing of the canals right on the aerial photographs, that the ability of that, when Bruce Phillips showed me that you can see the canals from the air in these old photos, that blew my mind, and that set me off on my dissertation. And reconstructing these canals that way, I mean, it's nothing new. You have that going back into Skylab days with Schoenwetter and some others. But just the detail you can see on these historic photographs is just amazing. And so with that detail, it illuminated that, yeah, Bruce was correct, that there's these spider web effect. And what Jerry had found, and he showed within the Park of the Canals, that there's these highly integrated systems. It's something, and it was reinforced by what Kathy and Desert found here at the SkyTrain with the fields, that these things are real, and at Las Capas, that it looks very similar. They're smaller, but it looks very similar in structure, and it's old. So we only have the date here is in the 1100s. There it's going into early ag period. And so this integrated structure of water management, as I brought up with the salinization and water management seems really integral, and it's really early realization. And that's kind of the antithesis is the field systems that we see here and along the Gila. So, I mean, what does this really tell us about the structural model of social organization and irrigation control? I mean, is there a hierarchy? Are there elites controlling this? Something that Hunt and others in ethnographic literature says, yeah, there can be, but if you look at a lot of state level society irrigation systems, if they're top down, they fail pretty quickly. But when you have systems in Valencia, Spain that have been running since the 1400s, and those are all farmer led. And you have a millennium here of control, that with a lot of the irrigation models and social control models for irrigation in the valley, it's based off the classic period when you have platform mounds. So there's an assumed link between the platform mounds and control of the irrigation systems, that the irrigation systems were running well before that type of organization, before the platform mounds came around. So you have some really long-term water management that have nothing to do with kind of the hierarchy that's shown with, or that's been argued for with the platform mounds, at least here. Next slide. So kind of what I argue for in a reassessment of irrigation control and social political authority is really thinking about the two as kind of realms. And this is what we see in our ethnographic literature. They have a person that's kind of in between, and you have these different realms where you have societal politics and irrigation interacting in different ways, that because they're the same people. The people that are farmers are also the ones that are controlling the water and are also controlling parts of the society, performing rituals and ceremonies. So it's all the same people, but they have different hats, as people have talked about. And so there's times when they're really linked, and there's times that they're not linked. So when you have the pre-classic classic transition and life seems really difficult, the irrigation systems, you don't see that within the irrigation systems. They're kind of going on and they become bigger, matter of fact. And it's not until the very end, when other things are going on, that you see the systems kind of phasing out or going away. And so I'd just say that when you're looking at these really large systems, yeah, they're really huge and it takes a lot of complexity to run them. They're not this tied link between the control or what's going on with in society as far as interactions and what's going on with the control of irrigation. So it's just accepting that there's people interact in different ways. There's different layers that interact in different ways.
You guys want to field some questions from the audience, and if you do, just make sure you repeat any, or if you have anything else to discuss, you know.
You want us to unmute and start the video on all or?
That would be good, yes.
On all
Well, maybe before we get started with a couple of questions, I just want to echo the others, just thank all the presenters. It's always good to get together and everybody come together and talk about these projects that everybody's been working on, and just to keep up the good work. Maybe a little bit later, I think we might all chime in on some things we think people ought to be doing to move us forward in the future with research. And we've already touched on some of that, but I just want to chime in on that first. Do we have any questions out there? Do you have another microphone, Dan, or just one up?
questions or comments?
Right.
We've got the 4 microphones, and that's it. So.
Okay.
We wouldn't be able to hear all.
Yeah, right.
Lorraine?
This was really amazing. I'm wondering about Chris's statement and Jared and others, original statement about not being able to continue large canal. You mentioned something in the recent presentation about possible. Can you talk a little bit more about that? It might make sense.
Yes, yes. So for the viewers, the question is about the comments that Chris just made about there's a limit to which you can extend the canal and expand the capacity to irrigate more acres without rebuilding the entire canal. And then Marina's asking about a comment I had made before about consolidating canal systems or linking them together in some way. And so there is a little bit difference to that. I'll just take that real quick. So I echo what I think, you know, following Jerry and some of these others have said. I mean, I think you can extend the canal to a certain extent, but absolutely to expand its capacity in a significant way, you have to rebuild it. And Kathy's presentation earlier was a fantastic example of seeing that progression of channels right next to each other and typically upslope of the existing canal, because that's where they're going to work while the other one is still farming and watering the fields. You're going to build the next one on the upslope side until it's done. We see the same thing in the Gila River as well. You see multiple overlapping channels being rebuilt over time in order to regrade or expand capacity. But there's also chances where, and this is, I think, a little more common along the Gila River, where you get more of a ribbon strip looking structure to the systems kind of all along the river. They will link or consolidate to adjacent canal systems in some attempt to provide additional, or I call it wastewater, so to speak. It's not really wastewater, but if you haven't used water, you can pass it along to the next canal system, and there's probably some sort of agreement between the users of the next canal system, and you consolidate the systems, and that provides you a little bit of a different additional water supply that you might not be getting out of your head gate on the river. Or like if something happened to your head gate or the diversion dam got, you know, destroyed somehow, you might be able to rely on that link with an upstream canal. So that's kind of what I refer to, or it's been referred to as consolidating systems or linking them together. It's a different concept.
I just add to that. I think earlier today, we heard some, at least a couple of papers about studying some of the canals south of downtown Phoenix, south of the river. Turney's Canal 7 or the Pueblo Viejo canal system. That seems like one to me that would be a good canal system to put to the test. I mean, seems to me that that is a system that had operated for a long time. And yet when you look at a lot of the maps, there's not a lot of multiple canal alignments along that system. And I'm sure that system grew through time, but we just, right now, I think we just kind of have this idea of a Pueblo Viejo canal. So if we're going to test some of these models, that seems like a good candidate for trying to do that. Of course, the problem is, can we get access to it in different places and dig below 4 feet deep and fully expose it? But that's one I think it's so different from System 2 that would be a great opportunity to sort of test those models. Tom?
So far, we don't have.
I think Bruce and I probably will have something to comment on that. I'll repeat the question. The question was, we do not seem to see canals, pre-Hohokam canals here in the Lower Salt River Valley, or at least not early agricultural age canals in the Lower Salt River Valley. Why is that? And were they not constructed here? Are they just, it's a sampling issue? Are they, you know, what are our thoughts on that? I'll begin this by saying, ever since Tucson started identifying these kind of early canals, that question has been, you know, haunting many of us. It's like, well, if they've got them, why wouldn't they have them on the Gila River? Why wouldn't they have them on the Salt River? And personally, I can't find any reason why they wouldn't be doing canal irrigation on those rivers back in early agricultural time. But you know, to find those canals, you got to find dirt of the right age, and the Lower Salt River floodplain is a very big landform, and we have trenched it in, quite a bit, but there's still a lot we haven't. And interesting enough, when we do find old dirt, we do find some old archaeology. I think of the Statistical Research Project out on at Tres Rios, where they hit early Archaic. There was this patch of preserved early Holocene, latest Pleistocene, early Holocene alluvium in the floodplain, and lo and behold, it had early Archaic. So I think that, personally, I think that there probably are pre-ceramic canals in the Salt River Valley, but we have yet to find them, and we need to find we need to look for more of that old dirt. I think Bruce has been spending a bit of time kind of looking for that and has some ideas on that as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the idea that we have to probably spend a lot of money to be able to find these things, open up large areas of very deep holes. Very recently, working with Logan Simpson in Tempe, we've identified a horizon that's about 1.5 meters deep, where there is definitely a, we call it late Archaic because we don't know if it's early agricultural yet, but it dates to about 1,000 years BC. At this point, it's mostly characterized by fire-cracked rock and a few thermal features. We know it's there. We know where to look, but it's very difficult to sell a developer on the idea that you're going to have to dig down 1.5 meters and then clear out an entire city block to find it. That's tough sell. So I think that's a large part of it. And until we get lucky with some of these limited deep trenches, get lucky and find a canal down that deep, we're still going to be guessing. So I think it has to do with logistics more than that it's not there or that those sediments aren't there.
Is there a particular part of the Salt and Gila River?
Tom asked, are there certain parts of the floodplain or reaches of the Salt River where we might or more likely to find archaic or early agricultural age alluvium? Near Tres Rios, we hit that patch, but I can't give you a reason why that patch is there. I think it was sort of just plain, it was preserved by luck with all these channel dynamics that are going on over the millennia. There does seem to be, I think, soil evidence for some old alluvium in the Lehigh Terrace up on the Salt River, Pima Maricopa Indian community. I don't know if you're familiar with that area or not, Tom, but we didn't hit any canals, but we hit some deposits that look old. I mean, this is the thing. If you start, we didn't date it, but you start looking at this alluvium long enough, you start to kind of recognize old dirt and young dirt. And this dirt looked old. It had some soil formation in it. And I'm thinking, boy, if we're going to find archaic, this would be it. We didn't. But I think there are patches like that upstream as well, in the sort of mesa. The Blue Point Terrace often is buried in that area, which is the latest Pleistocene terrace. And, there could be something sitting right on top of that. So I think both on the upper reach, upstream from Tempe Butte and downstream, there are these little patches. We just got to find them.
If I might throw one caveat on that, and it's not that this is going to torch that idea, is that one thing that I think is a big difference between what you see in the Tucson, and you brought this up, is the discharge level of the Salt River compared to the Santa Cruz it's like not even in the same atmosphere. It's completely different. So managing an irrigation system is extremely difficult on the Salt compared to that level of discharge on the Santa Cruz. So it could be that because, as far as we know, 1500 BC or maybe as early as 2000 BC, maybe the earliest that we know yet that irrigation was being used. I mean, these are small canals, relatively small field systems. Not that they're not sophisticated, but it could also be that the level of effort that would be required to build and maintain and the organizational skills to, I guess, if you will, tame a river of the size of the Salt River may not yet have been gotten to at that point. So again, it's not that it couldn't be there, because I concur. I mean, you got to find the old dirt, and that's hard. But it's the same thing on the Gila River, which is not as high a discharge as the lower Salt, but still much higher than the Santa Cruz. So I'll just throw that in there. It just may be that these reaches that are smaller, like Safford, also has a smaller discharge than what you see on the Middle Gila. It's just a little bit easier and to get that level of technology going. Hello?
Here. One is, a recommendation that have we spoken to native elders who have a lot of perspective on the history of farming and canals? I haven't. I don't work for a tribal organization or community, but I think that's a very good suggestion. I think it's very important to get perspectives from those who have worked with water for a long time, both Euro-American and Native, but particularly the Native perspectives would be very helpful since we were looking at indigenous water management systems here. And the other recommendation is, have we looked in caves for old dirt? That I have done, but we're not going to find the canals there. I mean, this is sort of the interest that we have here. But in terms of trying to find early evidence of human activity, yes, rock shelters and caves, excellent locations. Yes, thank you.
One more question. We have time for one more. So anybody else have a question?
Based on recording. You know, maybe it's already out there. You know, just if you have other archaeologists reporting that information.
Yes, sort of to reiterate, if there should be somebody early in the phase one to come up with a standard stratigraphic nomenclature and then convey that to the crew so that everybody's recording it the same way. At least you have consistency that way. Also, it's important that as new crew come in, that information is conveyed to them. I have found that in those instances where I have given lectures on standard stratigraphy, within 2 weeks to 3 weeks, it's all over the map again. And so it needs to be reiterated, especially on these large projects. I'm not kidding. There is that, yes.
Oh, man. Do the geomorphology first, even before stage one, because if you know and understand the geomorphic setting, place that you're going to be working, plan on how to excavate Las Capas. That big hole happened by accident. It happened because of the geomorphic setting. Prior to it, those discoveries were made because the geomorph was done first.
Know that that day, time weather, that features. Satisfying thing ever to that asphalt. Back a long way, feel all that back. But that's projects because cram it down there. So, I want to share with you. This is a success story. With 215, we're out there and you were showing me here is an undisturbed piece of plaza. This is what it looks like. I shared that with the crew. And a week later, one of the crew was sharing with the back. He had asked her, how do you know? How do you know this is not native? How do you know? And she said, well, there's lots of food.
Right.
Success, see that transmission of information coming from you to
Very good. I want to kind of repeat what Fred Niles was saying, that it would be great to have a geomorphic study done prior to the phase one, so that even going into the field to do the archaeology, the phase one testing, we already have an understanding of what the stratigraphy is, what the landscape essentially is going to tell us once we're out there. It should be part of the treatment plan. In my opinion, every treatment plan should have some geomorphology up front, so that we understand what we're getting into when we start digging 100 trenches.
Some situations we don't have yet. So if those studies start to build up, when we have going, jumping back.
I would just point out, yeah, in Texas, also looked down there. It's a lot of good days, not nevertheless. If you get a permit and do a survey, I have to do it. It's a possible, it's a more, you have to, other money or not be, so
That's true in several states, by the way.
We're gonna have about 2 minutes before 4:30, and the folks getting the room and need to get their cars out of here soon. So I want to thank you to all of our panelists today. Thank you for taking the time to prepare.